Captain Zethkar's 6 eyes studied the holographic display with growing excitement. The blue-scaled Vorthak had been hunting prey across 17 star systems for the better part of a galactic standard year, but this target would be different. This would be the prize that elevated his crew from common raiders to legends among the Hunters Guild. "Are you certain these readings are accurate?" he asked his scanner operator, a thin creature whose species had evolved specifically for detecting life signs across vast distances. "Positive, Captain. 137 life forms, all human. Their ship appears to be a civilian transport, lightly armed. They're moving slowly through the Kepler 438 system, probably heading for the outer colonies." Zethkar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Humans were rare this far from their home systems. Most civilized species knew better than to venture into the outer rim, where the Galactic Council's protection meant nothing and predators like himself ruled the void. But humans, in their typical arrogance, seemed to believe they could go wherever they pleased. The captain activated the ship's communication system, broadcasting on the frequency used by hunter crews across the galaxy. "This is Captain Zethkar of the Bloodfang. I'm declaring a human hunt in the Kepler 438 system. Any crew that wants to join the pack, set coordinates and prepare for the greatest hunt of your careers." Within hours, 7 more ships had answered the call. The Esikatar Collective sent their newest dreadnought, the Bone Crusher. The Myrmidon pirates contributed 3 fast attack vessels. Even the legendary Captain SS Caral, whose crew had once taken down an entire human military convoy, brought his infamous ship, the Soul Render. As the hunting pack assembled, crews across 8 vessels prepared their weapons with an eagerness that bordered on religious fervor. Humans represented the ultimate prize in the hunting community. They were intelligent enough to provide real sport, resilient enough to survive initial capture, and valuable enough in the slave markets to make every hunter wealthy beyond imagination. What made humans especially prized was their unpredictability. Unlike other species that followed logical patterns when cornered, humans seemed to operate on pure chaos. They would fight when they should surrender, negotiate when they should run, and sometimes perform actions so irrational that even experienced hunters found themselves caught off guard. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "the human vessel is sending out a distress signal. They know we're here." "Let them panic," Zethkar replied, settling into his command chair. "Fear makes the hunt more satisfying." The human ship, designated as the Civilian Transport Meridian, was indeed aware of the approaching threat. On the bridge, Captain Sarah Chen was coordinating with her crew of 137 passengers and workers, most of whom were families seeking new lives in the frontier colonies. The ship had been retrofitted from an old cargo hauler, with minimal defensive capabilities and no hope of outrunning military-grade hunter vessels. "Engineering, what's our status?" Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the impossible situation. "Engines are at maximum efficiency, but we're still looking at maybe 30% of their speed," Chief Engineer Rodriguez replied over the intercom. "The jump drive needs another 4 hours to charge for a system-wide jump." Sarah looked at her tactical display. 8 enemy ships were closing in formation, their approach calculated to cut off any escape route. The nearest Galactic Council patrol was 6 days away, and even if they received the distress signal, they wouldn't arrive in time to help. "Ma'am," her communications officer spoke up, "I'm picking up chatter between the hunter ships. They're calling this a human hunt and seem to be treating it like some kind of sporting event." The captain's jaw tightened. She had heard stories about human hunts, whispered tales from other ship captains who had encountered survivors. The hunters didn't just kill their prey quickly. They preferred to capture humans alive, selling some to slave markets while keeping others for extended hunts on designated planets. It was considered the highest form of entertainment among certain species. "Listen carefully, everyone," Sarah announced over the ship's intercom. "We have incoming hostiles, and they're not here to rob us. They want to capture us alive for purposes I won't describe. I need all civilian passengers to report to the emergency shelters immediately. All crew members with military experience, report to weapon stations." The response was immediate. Former soldiers, security officers, and even a few civilians with hunting experience began moving through the ship's corridors. The Meridian might be a civilian transport, but many of its passengers were frontier-bound settlers who had prepared for the possibility of violence. Meanwhile, the hunting pack was closing in, their formation tightening like a noose around the human ship. Captain Zethkar was savoring every moment, imagining the fear and desperation building aboard the Meridian. He had participated in dozens of hunts, but never against this many humans at once. The prize money alone would be enough to buy a small fleet. "Sir," his tactical officer announced, "the human ship is altering course. They're heading toward the asteroid field." "Excellent," Zethkar clicked his mandibles. "They think the rocks will provide cover. It will make the chase more interesting, but ultimately futile. Signal the pack to maintain pursuit formation and prepare boarding parties." The asteroid field of Kepler 438c was a dense collection of rocks and debris, some pieces as large as small moons. For a civilian ship like the Meridian, navigating through it would be treacherous at best. For military hunters with advanced sensors and weapons systems, it was merely an obstacle course that would eventually trap their prey. As the Meridian entered the field, Saracen was counting on more than just luck. The ship's manifest listed several passengers with very specific skill sets, people who had been seeking new opportunities in the frontier colonies after distinguished careers elsewhere. "Dr. Yuki Tanaka, please report to the bridge," Sarah announced over the intercom. Dr. Tanaka was a small Japanese woman in her 60s who had been traveling to the colonies to establish a research station. Her official credentials listed her as a xenobiology expert and ecological systems specialist. What they didn't mention was her previous 40-year career with the Human Defense Force, where she had served as a tactical weapons designer. "Captain," Dr. Tanaka said as she arrived on the bridge, "I assume you're not interested in my opinion on alien plant life." "I need weapons, Doctor. Anything you can jury-rig from our cargo or ship systems." Dr. Tanaka smiled for the first time since boarding the Meridian. "Captain, did you know that industrial cargo loaders use magnetic field generators powerful enough to move multi-ton containers? And that our atmospheric recycling system contains enough chemical compounds to create some very interesting reactions?" As the human ship disappeared deeper into the asteroid field, the hunters began to spread out, using their superior numbers to cut off escape routes. They had no idea that aboard the Meridian, 137 humans were doing what humans had always done best when cornered. They were getting creative. In the cargo bay, former Marine Sergeant Mike Torres was working with Dr. Tanaka to convert loading equipment into improvised weapons. The ship's industrial fabricators, normally used for creating replacement parts and basic supplies, were being reprogrammed to produce components that had nothing to do with civilian transport. "The beauty of magnetic field weaponry," Dr. Tanaka explained as they worked, "is that it uses the target's own metal content against them. These hunter ships are heavily armored, but that armor contains enough ferrous materials to make them vulnerable." Meanwhile, in the ship's medical bay, Dr. Amanda Foster was preparing for casualties while also contributing to the defense effort. Her knowledge of alien physiology, gained from years of treating injuries on frontier worlds, was being applied in ways she had never imagined. Most of these hunter species have respiratory systems that are extremely sensitive to atmospheric changes, she told the crew members who had gathered around her. "If we can modify the environmental suits to release specific chemical compounds during boarding actions." The planning continued throughout the ship as the Meridian navigated deeper into the asteroid field. Every department was contributing something to the defense effort, from the engineering crew who were modifying life support systems to create defensive barriers, to the food service staff who were preparing chemical compounds that would serve very different purposes than nutrition. Captain Zethkar was growing impatient. The human ship had been playing hide-and-seek among the asteroids for nearly 2 hours, and his pack was beginning to spread out over too wide an area. Worse, some of the younger hunters were becoming reckless, eager to claim the first capture. "Captain SS Corral," he transmitted to the Soul Render, "take your ship around the far side of the field. If they try to break out, I want you in position to intercept." "Understood, Zethkar. My crew is getting restless. They want to see human blood. Soon enough. But I want them taken alive if possible. Dead humans bring much lower prices." What Zethkar didn't know was that the Meridian had stopped running. Hidden in the shadow of a massive asteroid, the ship had gone into full stealth mode while its crew made final preparations for what Captain Chen was calling the last stand. "All stations, report readiness," Sarah commanded. "Weapons systems ready," reported Sergeant Torres from the cargo bay. "We've got 6 magnetic pulse devices and enough chemical charges to breach their hulls." "Medical combat teams standing by," Dr. Foster announced. "We've prepared atmospheric weapons and emergency treatment stations throughout the ship." "Engineering ready," Chief Rodriguez confirmed. "We've rigged the jump drive to overload on command. If we can't win, we'll make sure they don't get the prize." Sarah Chen looked around the bridge at her crew, then activated the ship-wide communication system. "Citizens of the Meridian, in 30 minutes, 8 ships full of predators are going to find us. They expect us to surrender, to beg for mercy, to make their hunt easy and entertaining. They've apparently never heard the humans saying about cornered animals." She paused, looking at the tactical display where the hunter ships were closing in from multiple directions. "They're about to learn why the galaxy's oldest rule exists. Never hunt humans. Not because we're the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest. But because when you hunt us, we hunt back. And we're very good at it." The transmission ended, and the Meridian waited in the darkness of space, its crew of 137 humans preparing to remind the galaxy why their species had spread across the stars despite every attempt to stop them. In the distance, the hunter ships continued their approach, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. They had no idea they were about to become prey themselves. The first hunter ship to locate the Meridian was the SCKTAR vessel Bone Crusher, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons designed for disabling rather than destroying prey. Captain Vexhai, a 4-armed creature whose species had evolved from pack hunters, felt his hearts racing with anticipation as his sensors locked onto the human ship. "Found them," he transmitted to the hunting pack. "They're hiding behind asteroid designation KC 7742, approximately 2 kilometers from my position. Beginning approach for capture protocols." Captain Zethkar's voice crackled back over the communication system. "Excellent work, Vexhai. Disable their engines first, then prepare boarding parties. Remember, we want them alive." Vexhai guided his ship around the massive asteroid, expecting to see a disabled civilian transport waiting helplessly for capture. Instead, he found the Meridian facing him directly, its modified cargo bay doors open like a mouth ready to bite. "What are they doing?" his weapons officer asked, confusion evident in his voice. "They're not running or signaling surrender." Before Vexhai could respond, 6 objects launched from the human ship's cargo bay. They weren't missiles or torpedoes, but rather industrial cargo containers that had been gutted and refitted with Dr. Tanaka's magnetic pulse devices. The improvised weapons crossed the distance between ships in seconds, their magnetic fields activating just as they reached the Bone Crusher's hull. The effect was immediate and devastating. The hunter ship's armor, designed to resist energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, offered no protection against magnetic forces that turned its own metal structure into a weapon against itself. Bulkheads twisted, support beams warped, and critical systems throughout the ship began failing as their metallic components were subjected to impossible stresses. "Hull breach on levels 4 through 7, the damage control officer reported, his voice rising in panic. "Structural integrity failing throughout the ship. Sir, we need to abandon the attack and retreat for repairs." But Vexhai's pride as a hunter wouldn't allow retreat. "Launch boarding pods. If we can't disable their ship cleanly, we'll take it by force." 3 boarding pods ejected from the Bone Crusher, their armored shells designed to punch through enemy hulls and deploy assault teams directly into the target vessel. The pods streaked toward the Meridian, their occupants preparing for close-quarters combat against terrified civilians. They found something very different waiting for them. The first pod breached the Meridian's hull near the cargo bay, its cutting charges creating a perfect entry point. 12 SCKTAR warriors poured through the breach, their weapons ready and their enhanced senses scanning for human life signs. What they encountered instead was Sergeant Mike Torres and 15 former military personnel who had turned the cargo bay into a killing field. The humans had used their knowledge of ship construction to create choke points, blind corners, and kill zones throughout the area. Industrial equipment had been repositioned to provide cover while also serving as improvised weapons. The atmospheric composition had been altered to favor human physiology while hindering the respiratory systems of most hunter species. "Welcome aboard," Torres called out as the SAKTAR warriors spread out through the bay. "Hope you're ready for a real fight." The battle was short but vicious. The hunters had expected to face panicked civilians, not trained soldiers who had prepared the battlefield to their advantage. Within minutes, half the boarding party was down, their advanced weapons useless in the confined space where human adaptability and tactical knowledge ruled supreme. The second boarding pod fared even worse. It breached the ship near the medical bay, where Dr. Foster and her team had prepared a very different kind of welcome. The atmospheric weapons they had created using medical supplies and life support chemicals proved devastatingly effective against alien physiology. The hunters found themselves struggling to breathe, their enhanced senses overwhelmed by compounds that had no effect on human biology. The third pod never made it aboard. Chief Rodriguez had anticipated the boarding attempt and prepared a surprise in the form of a controlled decompression that turned the hull breach into an exhaust port, ejecting the pod back into space before its occupants could disembark. Captain Vexhai watched in growing horror as his boarding parties were systematically destroyed by what were supposed to be helpless civilians. "This is impossible," he muttered, his forearms working frantically at his control console. "They're just humans. They're supposed to be easy prey." His communications officer looked up from her station with what could only be described as fear in her large, compound eyes. "Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from the human ship. They're addressing us directly." On the Bone Crusher's main screen, Captain Sarah Chin appeared, her uniform torn from the fighting but her expression calm and determined. Behind her, the bridge of the Meridian showed clear signs of battle preparation, with crew members moving efficiently between stations. "Captain Vexhai of the Bone Crusher," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the void between ships. "You came here to hunt humans. I want you to understand something before this goes any further. You're not the predator in this situation anymore. You're the prey." Vexhai activated his own transmission system, his voice filled with rage and confusion. "Impossible. We outnumber you 8-1. Our ships are military grade, our weapons are designed for capturing and killing. You're a civilian transport with improvised defenses." Sarah smiled, and the expression was anything but reassuring. "You know what the difference is between your species and mine? When your people developed space travel, you used it to hunt and pillage. When humans developed space travel, we used it to explore and settle. But, before we became explorers, we spent millions of years as the most successful persistence hunters in our planet's history. We didn't just hunt animals, Captain. We hunted each other." She gestured to something off-screen, and Vexhai saw other humans moving with military precision in the background. "Every human on this ship knows how to fight, because fighting is what we did to survive long before we reached the stars. And now you've given us something we haven't had in a long time. A real enemy." The transmission ended, leaving the Bone Crusher's bridge in stunned silence. Before anyone could respond, new contacts appeared on their sensors. The other hunter ships were closing in, drawn by Vexhai's distress signals and the unexpected resistance. But Captain Chen had been counting on that. While the Bone Crusher had been focused on its failed boarding attempt, the Meridian had used the time to implement the second phase of their defense plan. Dr. Tanaka's modifications to the ship's sensors had turned them into something entirely different: target acquisition systems. "All hunter vessels, this is Captain Sarah Chin of the Human Transport Meridian," she broadcast on all frequencies. "You came here expecting to hunt 137 helpless civilians. Instead, you found 137 humans who are tired of running and ready to remind you why the galaxy fears our species." As she spoke, the Meridian's modified systems were painting targeting solutions on all 8 hunter ships, identifying their weak points and broadcasting the information on frequencies that the hunters themselves used for coordination. But the targets weren't for the Meridian's weapons. They were for the asteroid field itself. "Dr. Tanaka," Sarah called out, "initiate Project Slingshot." Throughout the asteroid field, small charges that had been secretly deployed during their time in hiding began detonating. The explosions were precisely calculated, not to destroy the asteroids but to alter their trajectories. Massive chunks of rock and metal that had been floating peacefully in space suddenly began moving, their new courses taking them directly toward the hunter ships. The effect was like watching a three-dimensional puzzle come to life. Asteroids that had provided cover for the hunting pack suddenly became weapons, their immense mass and velocity turning them into kinetic projectiles that no ship could withstand. The hunters found themselves caught in a carefully orchestrated trap, with nowhere to run and no way to fight back against an entire asteroid field that had been turned into a weapon. Impossible, Captain Zethkar transmitted as his ship, the Blood Fawn, desperately tried to maneuver away from a mountain-sized asteroid that was bearing down on his position. How did they do this? How did they turn the entire field against us? Captain Shen's voice came back over the communication system, now broadcasting to all 8 hunter ships simultaneously. It's simple, Captain. You hunt individuals. Humans hunt as a species. Every human on this ship contributed something to this moment. Our engineer calculated the trajectories. Our doctor provided the chemical knowledge for the charges. Our cargo specialist knew how to position the explosives. Our passengers included former military personnel who understood tactics, and civilians who understood that sometimes you have to fight for your survival. She paused as the first hunter ship, one of the Myrmidon pirate vessels, failed to avoid its assigned asteroid and disappeared in a brief flash of light and debris. You see, Captain, you made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because we're civilians, we're helpless. You assumed that because we're human, we're prey. But the reason the galaxy has a rule about never hunting humans isn't because we're weak. It's because when you threaten us, we don't just fight back. We win. The second ship, another Myrmidon vessel, tried desperately to use its weapons to break apart the asteroid heading for its position. The energy beams carved deep gouges in the rock, but only succeeded in creating multiple smaller projectiles that spread out like a shotgun blast. The result was even more devastating than a single impact would have been. Captain S.S. Carral, the legendary hunter whose reputation had been built on decades of successful human hunts, found himself facing the largest asteroid of all. The Soul Render, his infamous ship that had terrorized the Outer Rim for years, was simply not fast enough to escape the massive chunk of rock and metal that Dr. Tanaka had designated for him. This is Captain S.S. Carral to any ship that can hear me, he transmitted on the emergency frequency. The humans have turned the asteroid field into a weapon. Repeat, they have weaponized the entire asteroid field. Any ship that receives this message, stay away from Kepler 438. The humans are not prey. They are the predators. His transmission cut off as the Soul Render was crushed between 2 asteroids that had been carefully guided to converge on his position. Of the 8 hunter ships that had entered the asteroid field confident in their superiority, only 4 remained operational. The others had been destroyed not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by human ingenuity and the willingness to turn any available resource into a weapon. Captain Zethkar's Blood Fawn was among the survivors, but barely. His ship had suffered massive damage avoiding the asteroids, and his crew was in a state of shock. The hunters who had expected an easy capture mission found themselves fighting for their lives against prey that had become predators. Captain, his communications officer reported, her voice shaking, the human ship is moving. They're coming directly toward us. On his tactical display, Zethkar could see the Meridian emerging from the asteroid field like an avenging spirit. The civilian transport had been modified during the battle, its hull showing new weapon ports and defensive systems that hadn't been there before. Somehow, while fighting off boarders and coordinating the asteroid attack, the humans had been rebuilding their ship for combat. All remaining ships, Zethkar transmitted to his surviving hunters, form up on my position. We still outnumber them 4-1. We can still salvage this hunt. But, even as he gave the order, Zethkar was beginning to understand why the galaxy's oldest rule existed. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were enjoying it. And that thought terrified him more than anything he had ever encountered in his long career as a predator. The 4 surviving hunter ships formed a defensive formation as the Meridian approached, their weapons trained on the human vessel that had somehow transformed from prey into predator. Captain Zethkar's confidence was shattered, but his pride demanded one final attempt to salvage the hunt. "All ships, concentrate fire on their engines," he commanded. "If we can disable their propulsion, we can still board them and take prisoners." The combined firepower of 4 military-grade hunter vessels should have been more than enough to cripple a civilian transport. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled the space between the ships, creating a deadly light show that would have overwhelmed any normal target. But the Meridian was no longer a normal target. The humans had spent the entire battle learning, adapting, and improving their defenses. What the hunters saw as a damaged civilian ship was actually a vessel that had been rebuilt from the inside out by 137 humans who refused to surrender. Chief Rodriguez had rerouted power from non-essential systems to create an energy field that deflected much of the incoming fire. Dr. Tanaka had used their understanding of alien technology, gained from studying the disabled boarding pods, to create countermeasures specifically designed to disrupt hunter weapon systems. Even the ship's hull had been reinforced using materials salvaged from the destroyed boarding parties. "Sir," the Bloodfang's weapons officer reported with growing alarm, "our hits are having minimal effect. Their ship appears to have been heavily modified during the battle." "How is that possible?" Captain Zethkar watched in disbelief as the human ship continued its approach, seemingly unbothered by the concentrated fire from 4 warships. "It's not possible. They're a civilian transport with improvised weapons. They shouldn't be able to withstand our combined firepower." But Dr. Foster's voice came over the communication system, her tone clinical and precise as if she were delivering a medical diagnosis. "Captain Zethkar, this is Dr. Amanda Foster, Chief Medical Officer of the Meridian. I thought you might be interested to know that we've been analyzing the physiology of your boarding party members. Fascinating biological adaptations your species have developed." The transmission was accompanied by detailed biological scans that appeared on every hunter ship's display screens. The information was incredibly detailed, showing internal organ structure, nervous system mapping, and what could only be described as targeting data for the most efficient ways to disable or kill members of each hunter species. "You see," Dr. Foster continued, "humans have a saying, 'Know your enemy.' We've spent the last few hours getting to know you very well. Your respiratory systems, your circulatory patterns, your neural networks, even your psychological profiles based on your communication patterns during the hunt." Captain Isikavar, commanding one of the remaining Myrmidon vessels, felt a chill run through his exoskeleton as he realized what the human doctor was implying. "They've been studying us. While we were hunting them, they were learning everything about us." The revelation was terrifying in its implications. The hunters had approached this as a standard prey capture mission, but the humans had turned it into a research opportunity. Every attack, every communication, every tactical decision had been analyzed and catalogued by minds that had evolved specifically to understand and exploit their enemies. "Captain Chen," Zethkar transmitted directly to the Meridian, "you've proven your point. Your species is more formidable than we expected. But you're still outnumbered, and our ships are still more powerful than yours. Surrender now, and we'll consider offering terms." Sarah Chan's laughter came back over the communication system, a sound that somehow managed to be both amused and terrifying. "Terms? Captain, you still don't understand the situation you're in. You think this is about ship-to-ship combat. You think this is about firepower and numbers. But this stopped being about ships the moment you decided to hunt humans." As she spoke, new contacts appeared on the hunter ship's sensors. At first, the readings made no sense. There appeared to be dozens of small objects moving through the asteroid field, too small to be ships but too large to be debris. "What are those contacts?" Captain Zethkar demanded of his sensor operator. "I'm not sure, sir. They appear to be pods of some kind. Very small, single-occupant craft. And they're moving fast." The truth was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. While the hunters had been focused on the ship-to-ship battle, teams of humans had been using the emergency evacuation pods as single-person fighters. Dr. Tanaka had modified each pod with improvised weapons systems, turning them into miniature assault craft that could maneuver through the asteroid field with an agility that no larger ship could match. But these weren't random attacks. Every human in those pods was there by choice, volunteers who had stepped forward when Captain Chen explained the plan. Former military personnel, civilian pilots, even teenagers who had grown up playing combat simulators had all contributed to what was essentially a swarm attack coordinated by human tactical doctrine. "Sir," the Bloodfang's tactical officer reported, "the pods are using the asteroids for cover. They're too small and fast for our main weapons to target effectively, and they're attacking our weak points with surgical precision." The attack was unlike anything the hunters had ever experienced. Instead of facing a single opponent with predictable tactics, they found themselves surrounded by dozens of individual humans, each one attacking independently while somehow coordinating their efforts into a devastating whole. Sergeant Torres, piloting one of the lead pods, had taken it upon himself to target the hunter ship's sensor arrays. His military experience had taught him that blind enemies were helpless enemies, and he moved through the asteroid field like a dancer, using his pod's small size and maneuverability to stay ahead of the hunter's defensive fire. "This is Torres to all pods," he transmitted on their private frequency. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy their ships. We're trying to disable them. Dr. Foster wants prisoners for her research, and Captain Chen wants to send a message to the rest of the galaxy." The message was clear: humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to learn, to adapt, and to make sure that anyone who threatened them understood the consequences of that decision. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, despite her age, had insisted on piloting one of the pods herself. Her target was the command and control systems of the hunter vessels, and her decades of experience with weapons design had given her an intimate knowledge of how to disable enemy ships without destroying them completely. "The key," she transmitted to the other pod pilots, "is to leave them functional but helpless. We want them to live, to remember this encounter, and to spread the word throughout the galaxy." Her pod darted between two asteroids and emerged directly behind the Myrmidon vessel Skull Render, its modified weapons systems targeting the ship's communication array with surgical precision. The attack didn't destroy the system, but it left the ship unable to coordinate with its allies or call for reinforcement. Meanwhile, on the Meridian itself, Captain Chen was implementing the final phase of their plan. The ship's modified sensors, the same ones that had been used to coordinate the asteroid attack, were now broadcasting on every frequency used by the galactic communication networks. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Transport Meridian, broadcasting on all frequencies to any ship, station, or settlement that can receive this message," she announced. "We are currently engaged in combat with 8 hunter vessels that attacked our civilian ship in violation of galactic law. We want the galaxy to witness what happens when you break the oldest rule in space: never hunt humans." The transmission was being recorded and broadcast live, creating a real-time documentary of the battle that was being received by communication networks across dozens of star systems. News organizations, military commanders, and civilian authorities were all watching as 137 humans systematically dismantled a hunter pack that should have been able to destroy them easily. Captain Zethkar realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about survival anymore. The humans were making an example of his hunting pack, demonstrating to the entire galaxy what happened when someone made the mistake of treating humans as prey. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. News networks, military commands, even other hunter groups. Everyone is watching this battle." The psychological impact was devastating. The hunters, who had built their reputations on being feared predators, were being humiliated in front of the entire galactic community. Worse, they were being used as an educational tool to teach the galaxy why the oldest rule existed. "Captain HFY War to all remaining ships," came a transmission from one of the Myrmidon vessels. "My ship is disabled. Propulsion is gone, weapons are offline, and my crew is requesting permission to surrender. These humans aren't just fighting us. They're studying us like laboratory specimens." The fear in his voice was unmistakable. The great hunter Captain HFY War, whose crew had terrorized merchant vessels for decades, had been reduced to begging for mercy from the prey he had come to capture. Captain Chen's response was swift and direct. Captain Isikavar, you and your crew will be taken prisoner and turned over to Galactic Council authorities to face trial for piracy and attempted slavery. But first, you're going to help us send a message to every other hunter in the galaxy. The remaining 3 hunter ships found themselves surrounded by human pods that had disabled their primary systems without destroying them. They were alive, conscious, and completely helpless, forced to watch as the humans demonstrated a level of tactical coordination and strategic thinking that no one in the galaxy had expected from a civilian transport. This is the lesson, Sarah Chin announced on the galactic broadcast frequency, her voice carrying to billions of listeners across dozens of star systems. Humans don't hunt for sport. We don't capture sentient beings for slavery. We don't terrorize the innocent for profit. But, when someone threatens us, when someone treats us as prey, we remind them why our species survived long enough to reach the stars. She gestured toward the disabled hunter ships, their crews now prisoners aboard their own vessels, guarded by humans who had transformed from helpless civilians into efficient predators in the span of a few hours. We are explorers and builders by choice, but we are survivors by nature. We adapt, we learn, we overcome, and we make sure that anyone who threatens innocent humans understands the consequences of that decision. This is why the galaxy has a rule about never hunting humans. Not because we are weak, but because when you make us your enemy, you discover that we are very good at it. The transmission ended with images of the 4 captured hunter ships being escorted out of the asteroid field by the Meridian and its swarm of human-piloted pods. The civilian transport that had been marked for capture and slavery was now the flagship of a small fleet that included 4 military vessels crewed by prisoners who would spend the rest of their lives explaining to other potential hunters why the oldest rule in the galaxy existed. Captain Zethkar, sitting in his command chair with human guards watching his every move, finally understood what he had awakened. His hunting pack hadn't just attacked a ship full of civilians. They had attacked a ship full of humans. And humans, when threatened, became something far more dangerous than any predator the galaxy had ever produced. They became human.